Chapter 6, and Policy Lessons. While the Queen in Buckingham Palace enjoyed a few moments of happiness as she prepared for most difficult moments in the risky adventure she had undertaken, throughout the country a wave of popular support for her had been sparked by the attempted against her lifetime. And Lord Melbourne also benefited from this popular enthusiasm. In a tavern, 3 men sat around a table and talked about the events. "Those damn bastards! Dare to attack the Queen! They should hang all those radical bastards!" exclaimed one of the men, an old man. "I could not agree more. By God, the Queen is so young, almost a girl of my daughter's age." "Fortunately, Lord Melbourne was there to save her life," replied another tall and sturdy man, who must be about 40. "He is a brave man without a doubt. Maybe another of those stretched aristocrats would have run away and have let the Queen be killed, cover her with his body and get shot for her. That was very brave, especially for someone accustomed to living a rich life," said the third man, a thin and pale man of something more than 30 years. "Although I do not like the way he rules the country, I must admit he's a brave man. He really has a pair of balls," replied the older man. "They say he's in love with the Queen," said the thin man. "They also say she's in love with him," the middle-aged man replied. "Foolishness! But if it was true, I prefer that the Queen be in love with a real man, and not with one of those effeminate foreign princes. Yes, sir, a man and an English patriot, like me," said the older man, drawing his pint of beer, while the thinner elbowed the man in his 40s and both laughed at his old companion. In another corner of the country, a woman who worked selling fish at a portside market chatted with an old friend while she worked. "If the latest news is true, it seems the Prime Minister will survive. Poor Queen Victoria must be very relieved, because if what the press tells is true, she loves him very much. And it's like not wanting it. A man who is willing to sacrifice his life for one," said the friend of the fisherwoman. "Have a man who is willing to die for you. I would like to know what that is," replied the fisherwoman, looking at her husband with the face very unfriendly, while cutting a fish's head with a sharp hatch, causing the man to clear his throat uncomfortably and say goodbye, leaving in a hurry. And elsewhere, in a sumptuous house of a wealthy family of businessmen, 3 teenage girls were crying in a room, when the lady of the house came in and she was baffled. "But what happens, girls? Why do you cry?" she asked in surprise. "It's just that we've been reading some chronicles in the newspapers and magazines about the beautiful story of Lord Melbourne and Queen Victoria. Poor Queen has suffered so much since they wounded him by saving her life. And if he does die, you imagine, Mom, what it is to lose the man you love that way." One of the girls answered in sobs. "You must not believe everything the tabloid says, girls. Surely they are bad gossip. The Queen cannot be in love with the Prime Minister. He is old enough to be her father. Besides, it would not be appropriate. The Queen will have to marry someone of her condition, a prince of royal blood," replied the mother. "But it would be so beautiful that it were true. So romantic," answered another one of the girls with a sigh. "Stop dreaming about beautiful stories of forbidden love. And better go do your homework, and do not read so many romantic novels," said the mother, and the girls left the room. When the girls left, the mother took some of the publications and began to read. And then she began to cry too, just as her husband came in. "But woman, what's wrong?" exclaimed the man. "Poor Victoria, poor Lord Melbourne. What a sad story," replied the woman, and left the room, leaving the man disconcerted. While thousands of similar scenes were played all over the country, in Buckingham Palace, Queen Victoria received Duke of Wellington in her office. After the usual greetings, they both sat facing each other. "Duke, I called, because I wanted to talk about a very important matter with you. I must tell you that Mr. Peel will join us at any moment, but first I wanted to anticipate what I want to talk to both of them," Victoria said solemnly, trying to look serene, but inside she was nervous. "Your Majesty, I am at your service. "I must admit I am somewhat intrigued by that, so urgent that you wish to deal with us," replied the Duke. "I've made a very important and difficult decision, Duke. It has not been impetuous, but a product of long meditation, and I want you to be the first to know. I have decided to marry Lord Melbourne." Wellington's face reflected a certain surprise, but not as great as would be expected in that particular situation, as if it were something that was not so unexpected. After that ephemeral moment of surprise, Wellington's face expressed seriousness and disgust. "Then, ma'am, I fear you have signed the death sentence of your reign," replied Wellington in his direct and relentlessly sincere manner. Victoria took the blow and for a moment her throat tightened, but she immediately calmed her nerves to return to the battle. "Duke, you are one of the few men I truly admire in this life. You are the greatest living hero in this country, and that is why I wanted to consult you first, because I understand that it is a state matter of the highest importance," Victoria said quietly, even with a slight smile. "I sincerely appreciate your words, Majesty, believe me when I tell you that I am excited to hear it from you. But you must understand that the admiration you so graciously manifests me will not change my opposition to this decision, ma'am," answered Wellington politely but firmly. "Duke of Wellington, do not misunderstand me, my words are always sincere with any of my subjects, for better or for worse. I don't praise expecting favours in return, because I am the Queen of this country, and I don't need to flatter anyone, on the contrary, it is generally to me who come with praise in hopes of obtaining favours," Victoria replied, her voice as cold and sharp as steel, without losing her composure, but with the restrained anger poking through her eyes, with a gesture that would have intimidated many. Wellington, accustomed to the clashes in politics and the dangers of war, could not help but be impressed by the Queen's reaction. That young girl really had fire inside her, majesty and gift of command, as if it were something natural in her. God, she looks like her grandfather in his good times when he had not lost his mind and was able to impose respect with a look, thought Wellington, thinking of the unfortunate King George III, Victoria's grandfather, whom she had not known. "I beg your pardon if you have been offended, Your Majesty. Of course I did not mean to, I just wanted to be honest in my opinion," Wellington replied honestly, but not sounding flattering. "I don't feel offended, Duke, and of course I appreciate your honesty, it's what I expect from you. But I only ask one thing. I ask you to listen to the arguments that I am going to express in front of Mr. Peel and you, without prejudice, with an open mind and above all, as if I were a king and not a queen. I once told you that because I was a woman I had to fight a battle every day to prove my worth, proving to everyone that I was capable of reigning like a man, despite my sex. I am not naive, and I know that I am judged more severely than a man, that what would be forgiven a king, in my case would not be tolerated, would be seen as a defect in my character as a result of my female condition, and to a lesser degree of my age. I am waiting for you, Duke, to listen to me with intelligence and common sense, with severity if it is necessary, but without prejudging me, and if once you hear my arguments you still think it is a crazy decision, I will not feel offended, if you says it to my face," said Victoria with poise and dignity. Wellington studied her, and in his heart he recognized that he still felt admiration and affection for the young queen, who continued to impress him with her halo of dignity and grandeur. "I think it's fair, Your Majesty. As a general I only judged my men for their performance on the battlefield, never out of appearances or prejudices. I'm willing to listen to you with an open mind," Wellington promised. "Thank you, Duke," Victoria replied. They exchanged a few more words, until they announced the arrival of Robert Peel, leader of the Conservative Party, the main opposition party to the Whig government of Lord Melbourne, and party to which the Duke of Wellington also belonged. Peel sat next to Wellington, in front of Queen Victoria. After a few words of courtesy, Victoria took the initiative. "Sir Robert, I called you because I want to announce two things to you. The first is that I will be happy to ask you to form a government, as my Prime Minister." Peel put on an expression of surprise, which Victoria found very funny and had to make an effort not to laugh and maintain a solemn and expressionless gesture. But your Majesty. I thought Lord Melbourne thought to continue to lead the government, and that was your wish too," said Peel in astonishment, causing Wellington couldn't help but an ironic laughter, which made Peel more disconcerted. "You're wrong, Sir Robert," Victoria said with a wry smile. "But, I do not understand, this is not the usual procedure. The resignation of Lord Melbourne has not been officially announced, and generally you should meet alone with me, not that I am disturbed by the presence of dear friend the Duke of Wellington, but," said Peel without understanding. "Sir Robert, I know the procedures perfectly. The point is that I have not yet asked for it officially, I just announced my intention to do it informally. And the reason for that has to do with the second thing I want to announce to you," Victoria said quietly. "The second thing, and what would it be, Majesty?" asked Peel, more confused, especially when he saw the sarcastic and somewhat amused expression of his friend and former boss Wellington. "The thing is, I'll soon add a new official title to the list of titles I own," Victoria answered, with some malignant and mischievous satisfaction. "A new title? Which, Majesty?" asked Peel with that stupid toad grin that irritated Victoria and made her laugh at the same time. "The title of Viscountess of Melbourne," Victoria said quietly. Wellington could not help but laugh, while it took Peel a few moments to assimilate and understand what he had heard. And when he did, an expression of awe and horror rose in his face, and he was about to rise in a spontaneous reaction, but he restrained himself, remembering that he should not be standing in the presence of the Queen until she did not first. "But your Majesty, marrying Lord Melbourne is..." Peel was going to say, but he broke off at the hard warning look on Victoria's face, that regal expression of cold anger that reminded Wellington again to the Queen's grandfather. "Robert, I promised Her Majesty that we would listen to her reasons or arguments without prejudging, with an open mind. Let us wait until then to expose to Her Majesty our sincere and loyal opinions on the suitability or not of that union," Wellington interjected, knowing antipathy that Victoria felt for Peel and aware of the little tact that had Tory leader, to avoid a clash between both of which would harm its friend and the party of both. "Thank you, Duke, gentlemen, the first argument may seem very basic or simplistic, but as you will see it has weight. Lord Melbourne is an Englishman, a gentleman of this country, a British patriot." Victoria began to expose and saw that her first words were received with indulgent and disdainful smiles from her listeners, as if they were hearing an innocent little girl trying to opine about adult themes, but she did not let herself be frightened. "It is no secret to you that my family's main candidate to marry me is my cousin Albert, a German prince. Well, I must remind you gentlemen that, although I don't look like I am half German, because my mother is German. If to that we add that on the part of my father I also have a lot of German blood, it could be said that in fact more than half of my blood is German. If I will marry a German, more than 3/4 of my children's blood will be German, and the future king or queen will be much more German than English, at least of blood. It is true that my dynasty comes from Germany, but do not you think that the British can begin to feel uncomfortable with so much foreign blood, especially German, in the veins of their reigning dynasty, of their monarchs?" Peel and Wellington became serious and stirred uneasily in their seats. Victoria had expressed something to them, especially to Wellington, that seemed to them an uncomfortable truth which they certainly did not see with good eyes. "If we add that the main motivation of my family to want to get married me with Albert or any other of my German cousins is to want to control me for the benefit of their interests, foreign interests, then we have a strong argument against this possible union. Gentlemen, my uncle Leopold, the King of the Belgians, and my mother, are determined to get married me Albert for obvious reasons. My mother wants to exert on me the control that she next to Conroy failed to obtain, and my uncle also wants to manipulate me in his benefit. To this is added the interest of Albert's father, who is supposed to be my future father-in-law, Duke Ernest I of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. I have in my possession," Victoria said, rummaging through some of the red drawers containing the official government documents, confidential reports from the government, from our agents abroad. According to credible sources, Duke Ernest boasts that his son is going to marry the richest woman in the world, the queen of the richest country in the world, and that something of that immense wealth must reign on its small and impoverished principality. German bastard! Said the Duke of Wellington under his breath with anger, while Mr. Peel twisted his face in annoyance and Victoria pretended not to have listened to Wellington and she avoided a smile. On the other hand, my uncle Leopold, although somewhat more discreet, has confided to people in his court that if he gets me to marry Albert, he will have the crown of Great Britain in his pocket, and with it goes to guarantee unconditional British support to stand on the throne of his small and fragile kingdom, which has less than a decade of existence, a support even at the expense of British national interests. As you see, gentlemen, my family's goal, though it pains me to say it, is that the crown is at the service of foreign interests, instead of serving the British people. Do you imagine what public opinion would think if the press had access to these secret reports from the Foreign Office? Especially if it were the newspapers close to your Conservative Party. Victoria said, depositing the reports in a small table that was next to Peel, which made that it and Wellington exchanged a significant look. Also, continued Victoria, we must weigh the fact that my uncle Leopold converted to Catholicism, or if you prefer, he became Papist to be King of Belgium, and being my cousin Albert so close to him, we don't know how Catholicism could be influential for my cousin. In that, Her Majesty is absolutely right. I've warned you, Robert, since we started talking about that possible wedding, the German prince might be the Trojan horse of Papaism to enter our royal family, exclaimed Wellington, while Peel shrugged. Victoria smiled wickedly, knowing that she had touched a sensitive fibre in the Duke of Wellington, who was a fervent adversary of Catholicism and for that reason had expressed reticence to a possible wedding of her with Albert, arranged by the Papist Leopold. In any case, if I married another prince of any other European royal house, the situation would not be very different. Any ruling dynasty would try to use my union with one of its members for the benefit of their own interests, putting their interests before the national interests from England. And that, in these times so convulsed on the European Strategic Board, is very risky, said Victoria, continuing her studied exposition. On the other hand, gentlemen, the same reports from the Foreign Office that the Cabinet sent me indicate a growing political turmoil in the continent. Reports from all our embassies, from Moscow to Lisbon, through Paris, Berlin, Vienna, or Madrid, report political movements that may trigger in the next few years new revolutions in Europe that threaten the continent's monarchies. Just here, the Cartists promoted revolts and attempted to trigger a revolution, and so blood ran. And the recent attempted against my life. Victoria's voice cracked a little as she remembered the recent event that had left her traumatized, shows how far the most radical fanatics are willing to go. In these dangerous times, more than ever, we need a solid monarchy headed by a monarch who can awaken the affection and loyalty of the great majority of his subjects, that can unite the nation, away from the abyss of a revolution, and who could do better than a young and charming queen. Above all, if that queen is married to the man she loves, a good and noble man, and together they form an exemplary family, a good English family that is a role model for the whole country. A romantic legend, of those that so much like the public opinion. Romanticism and family to defend order against the revolution and anarchy. Wellington and Peel looked at each other, and each saw something of surprise in the other's face, thinking that it was as if they were listening to a veteran politician and not to a frail and innocent young lady. Now, we imagine that I have to abdicate for the opposition to my wedding. You gentlemen, do you think that my uncle the Duke of Cumberland could be a better guarantee than I am in the face of the threat of revolution? My uncle, a man who nothing else became King of Hanover, abolished the constitution of his kingdom. The Duke of Cumberland could unleash a revolution rather than prevent it, and I do not have to remind you of the tragedies that have occurred in this country every time they have had to overthrow a king by force. From that perspective, I think my choice is much more attractive. Your Majesty, I understand your reasons and I find your arguments very strong, but Lord Melbourne is a Viscount and you Queen, it would be a very uneven marriage, said Robert Peel. Yes, Sir Robert, but then, does that mean that any English nobleman is less worthy than the last prince of the smallest and poorest European principality? Said Victoria, causing Peel and Wellington to be wounded in their own pride. Gentlemen, times change, and rules can be changed within a certain order. Nor is it a matter of marrying a commoner. Lord Melbourne is noble, even if it is of the low nobility. Why could a queen not marry a duke, marquis, earl, or viscount of her own country? Besides, I think that in my case, that I am a young woman, it is better for me to have a mature husband with wisdom and experience in life, who can temper my youthful impulses, than a husband almost as young and inexperienced as me, with the aggravation of being foreign and therefore unfamiliar with our customs and laws. But your husband would have been your prime minister and leader of a political party that calls into question the Crown's impartiality in politics, Wellington said quietly. Duke is right, but obviously Lord Melbourne is going to immediately resign the leadership of his party, and from now on he will stay away from politics. He will not even step back into the halls where the leaders of the Whig party meet. Apart from appearances, if Lord Melbourne marries me, all his appearances and public statements will be consulted beforehand with the government, and he will not say a word in public that does not have the approval of your future government, Sir Robert. Gentlemen, I believe that you know Lord Melbourne well, and you know that he is a very cautious man and respectful of the British Constitution. You may not know it, but as Prime Minister I often advise me to improve my relationship with your party and with you in particular, Sir Robert, even though you are opposed to the Melbourne cabinet. On the other hand, I do not think I have to emphasize that I make my own decisions, that I am absolutely independent in my role as Queen, and that in the same way that I have not accepted to be a puppet of my family, even of my mother, I will not be my husband's. You have my word on that. Peel and Wellington looked uncertain and suspicious yet in their faces. Sir Robert, I understand that you and me start off on the left foot, said Victoria, trying to sound very agreeable, for that unfortunate misunderstanding between you and me over the matter of my ladies of the bedchamber, which prevented you from becoming Prime Minister. But I was then more inexperienced and did not quite understand the subtleties of politics. I am now more aware of the importance of certain symbolisms. If you become my Prime Minister, I am willing to cooperate with you in the same way that I did with Lord Melbourne. I am even willing to accept that almost all my ladies are replaced by Tory ladies, except for two friends dear to me. Sir Robert, it is true that the Crown must be impartial, but it is also true that a Prime Minister can benefit greatly from the friendship of his Queen, and above all from the gratitude of his Queen. You must take it into account. Peel and Wellington understood the message the Queen wanted to send them, offering her support to the next Conservative government in exchange for their support of her marriage to Lord Melbourne. Sir Robert, I think I'm not mistaken, I do think that this might be your last chance to be Prime Minister and govern this country again. You've seen the newspapers and you've seen the reaction of the people in the street. You know that the attempted has awakened a wave of popular sympathy for me and Lord Melbourne, and that even the rumours of a romantic story between he and me are not badly received by many people. Now suppose you and your party oppose my marriage, and that is why this popular fervour turns against you in the elections, or worse, let's suppose Lord Melbourne run again as a candidate for Prime Minister, that could make things difficult for you, said Victoria, and saw in the Mr. Peel's face his dislike with the prospects, but on the contrary, if your party supports my marriage, and you participate in the wedding ceremony in preeminent place as Prime Minister, you could benefit from popular fervour and have a better chance of to win the election to the successor of Lord Melbourne like leader of Whig Party, that surely will be Lord John Russell. I think you'd have the election in your pocket, Sir Robert. The stick and the carrot, Wellington thought with respect for Victoria, offer reward and punishment to get something from someone, something classic but effective. Majesty, supposing that it would be possible to consider your proposal, you have to keep in mind that it should have the approval of the Privy Council, and that will be very difficult, said Peel. Well, I think if I do manage to persuade the Duke of Wellington, I will have strong support in the Privy Council, Victoria replied with a smile to Wellington, but I also have another strong support in the Privy Council, my dear uncle the Duke of Sussex. The Duke of Sussex supports your wedding with Lord Melbourne. Wellington said in surprise. Yes, he do, and I hope to have the pleasure of having my uncle's wife, the Duchess of Inverness, at my wedding, Victoria said mischievously. The Duchess of? I see, Wellington replied, and soon understood that Victoria had bought her uncle's support with a nobility title for his second wife, a title that allowed the woman to enter the royal and nobility circles. Wellington felt more respect for the intelligence and Machiavellian ability of the Queen. But, even if the Privy Council gives its approval, it will have to discuss in Parliament such matters as your husband's title, your assignment. It will not be easy to come to an agreement. Evidently Lord Melbourne could not be king consort, not even prince consort. It will be difficult to find an acceptable title, said Peel. Sir Robert, Lord Melbourne is a man worthy of the highest honours, but he is very modest, and I am realist. We will not be very picky about the subject of the title, but of course I will not tolerate that he is humiliated. Your position at my side should be discreet but dignified. You must have the right place to be my husband. And of course my children with him will inherit the crown. I will not tolerate anyone wanting to disinherit my children because of their father's condition. As for the assignment, my future husband will not receive an allowance, Victoria replied. No assignment, ma'am? Wellington said in surprise. Not a penny, Duke. He will live of his own peculium and of course he will benefit from my food and my accommodation free of charge, Victoria replied with some irony. But your Majesty, that cannot be. How can we justify that the Queen's husband does not receive any allowance while her relatives do? Like your uncle Leopold, who, despite being King of Belgium, still receives an allowance as your cousin's widower, a large enough allowance, said Mr. Peel. Well, Sir Robert, that's one of the things your next government could do, Victoria said coldly. Wellington was surprised again, seeing that the Queen tacitly authorised Peel to revoke her uncle's assignment. The old Duke thought that rumours of a violent argument between the Queen and her uncle in the days after the attempted were true, when the Queen was suffering from the fear of losing Lord Melbourne, and her impertinent uncle insisted that the attack was one more reason to accelerate marriage plans with Albert, and thus guarantee succession to the throne. The people said that the Queen was beside herself, and that she practically threw her uncle out of the palace, and that the very offended Belgian king had left the country the next day without saying goodbye to her niece, who she did nothing to reconcile with him. For his part, Mr. Peel smiled contentedly for the first time throughout the interview. Your Majesty, although it is true that there is a popular fervour as you say, a part of public opinion will not accept it so easily, said Peel, getting more and more to the idea. Sir Robert, the public opinion can be guided. If I have the help of the press, both Whig and Conservative, and for that I count on your help, Victoria replied. Majesty, I must warn you that this union will generate criticism in other European countries. You will see it as something scandalous, Peel added. Sir Robert, we are the most powerful empire on earth. This will be the British century. We do not have to worry about the opinion of others, it is they who must worry about ours opinions, Victoria said in a regal tone. Your Majesty, if you had been born a man and had not been born in the bosom of the royal house, you would have been a magnificent Prime Minister, exclaimed Wellington with sincere admiration and amusement. No one knows, Duke, maybe someday there will be a woman as Prime Minister, said Victoria in amusement. Ha ha! You have a good sense of humour, ma'am, Wellington replied. Majesty, even so. Peel was about to say. Robert, accept it. Her Majesty has won. We must recognise that Lord Melbourne is an honourable gentleman, an honourable and patriotic man. His only fault is to be Whig. I would loved him to be outside ours, but no one is perfect. The Queen has eloquently expressed her arguments, and we must recognise that they are strong and reasonable. I think we should support her in her decision, and you must be Prime Minister to back her in this difficult situation, Wellington said. It will not be easy to convince the whole party, Wellington, you know, many of our parliamentarians will object, Peel replied. With you and me, with the current leader and the former leader of the party backing the decision, we will bend the dissidents and convince everyone, with the support of the two major parties, the press and the Privy Council, Her Majesty will get the support to their decision. What do you say, Robert? Wellington said. Agreed. The Tories will support your decision, Your Majesty, Peel told Victoria. Thank you, Sir Robert, Duke of Wellington. Victoria replied, barely holding her emotion. After Peel and Wellington left, Victoria ran into the arms of Lord Melbourne and wept with joy, and she told him the good news. At last they could marry again, this time in public, and they would love without hiding. But it was still missing, so that both finally gave themselves to physical love in their marriage bed.